The dinner was supposed to be simple. That's what I told myself while setting my son's plate on the table. Just family, food, and one evening of pretending everything was fine. The kind of pretending I had grown up doing. The kind I thought I had learned to survive. My family gathered around the long wooden table like they always did, filling the room with noise before anyone even sat down. My mother fussed over the dishes, my brother cracked jokes too loudly, and my aunts whispered to each other with knowing smiles. It looked warm, familiar, safe. My son sat beside me, his legs swinging slightly above the floor. He was nervous. I could tell by the way he kept smoothing the edge of his napkin, but he was trying so hard to be polite. He had even rehearsed saying thank you and excuse me on the way over. I told him it would be fine. I was wrong. At first, the comments were wrapped in smiles. My brother leaned back in his chair and asked casually, "So, how's school going for him now? Still having trouble keeping up?" I felt my jaw tighten. "He's doing his best," I said carefully. My aunt chuckled. "Doing his best isn't always enough, you know. Life doesn't slow down for sensitive kids." The word sensitive hung in the air like an insult, pretending to be concern. My son poked at his food, the fork trembling slightly in his hand. I reached over and squeezed his knee under the table, a silent promise that I was there. But even as I did, I felt the old fear rise in my chest, the fear of speaking up, of becoming the problem. Then someone laughed. "He's just so quiet." My cousin said, "Does he even talk at school, or is he like this all the time?" More laughter followed. Not loud, not cruel on the surface, but sharp enough to cut. I opened my mouth, but my mother spoke first. "Well, not everyone can be a star," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Some kids are just background people." That was when my son stopped eating. He lowered his head and stared at his plate like it had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the room. His shoulders curled inward, making him look smaller than he already was. I watched the light in his eyes dim, piece by piece, and something inside me twisted painfully. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and flip the table. I wanted to protect him the way no one had protected me. But instead, I stayed still. Because that's what I had always done. Stayed quiet. Stayed agreeable. Stayed grateful just to be included, even when inclusion came with humiliation. The comments kept coming. "Well, at least he's cute," someone added, as if that made everything better. "He'll toughen up eventually," another said. "If not," my brother joked, "the world will do it for him." They laughed again. I didn't. I looked at my son's face and saw something I had seen in the mirror years ago. Confusion mixed with shame. The slow realization that being yourself was somehow wrong. That realization settles deep. It stays. Dinner dragged on, every minute heavier than the last. My son barely touched his food. When dessert came out, he didn't even look up. No one noticed, or worse, they noticed and didn't care. When it was finally time to leave, my mother hugged him quickly and said, "You need to smile more, sweetheart. People like happy kids." He nodded. That broke me more than anything else. The drive home was silent. Streetlights passed by like blinking eyes, and the weight in my chest refused to lift. My son stared out the window, his reflection faint against the glass. Halfway home, he spoke. "Did I do something wrong?" I swallowed hard. "No," I said too quickly. "Of course not." He hesitated, then asked in a voice barely above a whisper, "Then why were they laughing at me?" I didn't have an answer. When we got home, he went straight to his room without saying good night. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at his closed door, listening to the echo of laughter that didn't belong there. That night, as I sat alone in the dark, one truth finally settled in my bones. That dinner wasn't just uncomfortable. It wasn't just rude. It was a line, and I had let my family cross it, but not again. The house felt different the morning after the dinner, too still, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stood in the kitchen staring at my son's untouched cereal bowl, the spoon resting exactly where I had placed it. He had always been careful like that, too careful for a child. When he finally came out of his room, his steps were slow. He didn't meet my eyes. He just sat down and began eating in silence, each movement small and controlled. No humming, no questions. None of the little habits that used to fill our mornings. "Good morning," I said gently. "Morning," he replied, barely audible, the quiet between us pressed down hard. I wanted to ask how he was feeling, wanted to tell him how sorry I was. But guilt made my throat tight. Because apologies mean little when they come after the damage is done. On the way to school, he stared out the window again. That same distant look. I noticed his hands twisting together in his lap, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in months. "About last night," I began. He flinched. "It's okay." He said quickly, too quickly. "They were just joking. Grandma said so." That hurt more than if he had cried. I dropped him off at school and watched him walk away, his backpack slightly too big for his small frame. For the first time, I wondered how many other moments like this he had endured quietly. How many times he had learned to shrink himself because adults thought cruelty was character building. All day, my mind replayed the dinner, every laugh, every pause where I should have spoken. I realized something uncomfortable. My family hadn't changed. I had just gotten better at ignoring who they really were. That evening, my son didn't rush to tell me about his day like he usually did. He went to his room, closed the door, and stayed there. When I finally checked on him, he was lining up his toys in perfect rows, adjusting them again and again. "Hey," I said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "Want to talk?" He shrugged without looking up. I sat on the floor beside him. The silence stretched between us, fragile and heavy. Finally, he spoke. "They don't like me, do they?" My chest tightened. "That's not true." He glanced at me then, eyes searching. "They like other kids more." There it was, the truth he had been holding inside. I reached for his hand, and he let me take it. "There's nothing wrong with you," I said firmly. "Nothing." He hesitated, then asked the question I hadn't been ready for. Would they like me more if I talked louder, or if I was better at school? I closed my eyes, fighting the sting of tears. This was how it starts, I thought, the bargaining, the belief that love has to be earned by changing who you are. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat alone on the couch and let the memories come, my own childhood dinners. The comparisons, the jokes disguised as concern. I remembered how long it took me to realize that love shouldn't hurt. And I realized something else, something harder to admit. By staying silent all those years, I had taught my family that their behavior was acceptable. By staying silent at that dinner, I had taught my son the same thing. The next few days, I watched him closely. He laughed less. He apologized for things that didn't require an apology. When I praised him, he looked surprised, like kindness was unexpected. One afternoon, while helping him with homework, he erased his answers over and over. "It doesn't have to be perfect," I told him. He nodded, but his hand kept shaking. That was when anger finally replaced guilt, not explosive anger. Not the kind that screams, the quiet kind, the kind that makes decisions. I realized I couldn't undo what had happened, but I could decide what would never happen again. I could choose discomfort for myself over pain for my child. Late that night, I opened my phone and scrolled through messages from my family. Plans for the next gathering, jokes, pretending nothing had happened. My fingers hovered over the screen. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of disappointing them. I felt afraid of failing my son again. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. The silence in our house was no longer empty. It was preparing me to draw a line. The invitation came 3 days later, wrapped in cheerful words and familiar emojis, as if nothing had happened. "Sunday dinner at Mom's, don't be late." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling that old reflex kick in, the urge to smooth things over, to show up, to pretend. Then I looked at my son across the room. He was coloring quietly at the table, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. When he noticed me watching, he smiled a small, careful smile, like he wasn't sure it was welcome. Something inside me settled. I typed 2 words, "We won't be there." The phone rang almost immediately. "What do you mean you're not coming?" My mother demanded, confusion sharpening her voice. "Everyone will be there, I know. I said calmly, that's why. There was a pause, then a laugh. You're still upset about that. You're being dramatic. I felt my hands shake, but I kept my voice steady. You humiliated my son. Oh, please. She scoffed. No one humiliated him. We were just talking. That wasn't talking. I said that was cruelty. The line went quiet. When she spoke again, her tone had changed, cooler now. You're turning him weak. He needs to learn how the world works. I ended the call. That was the first boundary I ever set without apologizing. The messages started after that, from my brother. My aunts, even cousins who hadn't said a word at the dinner, suddenly had opinions. You're overreacting. He needs thicker skin. Family jokes don't count. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just stopped responding. The silence unsettled them more than any confrontation ever could. The next step was harder. For years, I had been the reliable one. The helper, the backup plan. I lent money without question, showed up without being asked, filled in the gaps whenever someone needed something. I had thought that was love. I realized now it was leverage. So I stopped. When my brother asked for help covering a bill, I said no. When my mother hinted about needing assistance, I didn't rush in. Each refusal felt unnatural at first, like I was breaking some invisible rule, but with every boundary I felt stronger. They noticed. You've changed. My aunt accused over the phone. You used to care about family. I still do. I replied. That's why I'm protecting my child. She had no answer for that. At home, the change was visible too. My son began to relax in ways I hadn't realized he was tense. He sprawled across the couch again. He laughed louder. Once he even interrupted me mid-sentence, something he hadn't done in weeks. One evening he asked quietly, "Are we in trouble with Grandma?" I knelt in front of him. "No," I said firmly. "You didn't do anything wrong." He thought about that, then nodded. The true test came when we ran into my family unexpectedly at the grocery store. My brother's eyes flicked to my son, then back to me. "So," he said casually, "are you done with the silent treatment?" I met his gaze. "This isn't a punishment, it's a boundary." He rolled his eyes. "You think you're better than us now?" "No." I said. "I think my son deserves better." That shut him up. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "You're tearing this family apart." I stared at the words, feeling a familiar ache, but this time it didn't control me. I typed back, "I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm refusing to let my child be hurt." No reply came. And that's when I knew I had crossed a line they never expected me to draw. The line where their comfort ended and my child's safety began. I tucked my son into bed that night, brushing his hair back gently. As I turned to leave, he reached for my hand. "Thank you for staying home," he said softly. In that moment, every doubt disappeared, because choosing him didn't feel like a loss. It felt like freedom. Time has a way of revealing truths that arguments never can. Weeks passed, then months, and the distance between my family and us grew quiet and wide. There were no dramatic confrontations, no tearful apologies, just the slow realization on their end that I wasn't coming back the way I used to. At first they waited, then they tested. My mother sent casual messages, pretending nothing had changed. My brother tried humor, dropping jokes into the family group chat like bait. When that didn't work, the tone shifted. The calls became colder, the pauses longer. They needed me, and for the first time, I didn't fill the space. The real revenge wasn't in what I said. It was in what I no longer did. I wasn't available. I didn't explain myself. I didn't soften my boundaries to make them comfortable. I let them feel the absence of the person who had always shown up, no matter the cost. At home, something beautiful was happening. My son started inviting friends over again. He left his door open. He sang while brushing his teeth. One night, I heard him laughing so hard in his room that it startled me. It had been so long since I'd heard that sound. I watched him grow into himself again, like a plant finally given light. One afternoon, he came home from school holding a paper in his hands, eyes bright. "I read in front of the class today," he said, almost disbelieving I didn't mess up. I hugged him tightly. "I knew you could do it." He paused, then said, "I think I'm brave now." That was the moment I knew the cycle was broken. Eventually, the confrontation I had avoided came anyway. My mother showed up at my door unannounced, her face tight with frustration. "This has gone on long enough," she said. "You're punishing everyone over one dinner." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue, I just said that dinner changed everything. She scoffed. "You're choosing a child's feelings over family tradition." I met her eyes. "I'm choosing my child over your tradition." She had no response. When she left, I felt a strange calm. No guilt, no regret, just clarity. That night, my son crawled into bed beside me, something he hadn't done in years. He rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, "You always stand up for me now." "Yes," I said, "always." That promise became our new foundation. I understood then that sweet revenge isn't about humiliation or payback. It's about removing access. It's about denying people the privilege of your presence when they misuse it. My family lost their favorite role. The judges, the critics, the ones who decided who was worthy. And in losing it, they lost control. What they never took from us was our peace. Years from now, my son won't remember every insult or every laugh. But he will remember this. When the moment came, I chose him. I drew a line. I ended a pattern that had lasted generations. And that is the quiet victory they'll never understand, because the sweetest revenge of all was raising a child who knew his worth.